Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage, was released in 2017 with gameplay taking place in the timeline concurrently with the events of KH1. Although 0.2 was originally intended to be the Kingdom Hearts 3 prologue, it was ultimately separated in order to provide the necessary space to more thoroughly explore Aqua's plight in the realm of darkness. Despite 0.2 being the shortest game in the series, clocking in at about 3 hours of main story, the soundtrack would go on to become one of the most impressive in the modern era of the franchise, for how successfully it would be transformed and adapted to the various situations happening on screen. This game, like Dream Drop Distance, takes familiar themes and twists them in remarkable ways, and this gives us, the listeners, an opportunity to more profoundly appreciate how a new setting can alter familiar tracks to give these pieces a uniquely unsettling atmosphere for the Dark Realm, and for the franchise. 0.2's lasting musical legacy will have been how effectively it will prepare the listener for the paradigm shift that would define the eventual soundtrack direction of Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, although the game was released in January 2017, the soundtrack for the title wouldn't come out until almost 4 years later, on November 11th, 2020. In this anthology soundtrack, all 6 of the 0.2 originals conclude the final disc, and we can take a look at how these 6 pieces can be categorized alongside the many reused tracks from throughout the game. In this categorization of all 25 pieces that play throughout 0.2, I don't expect that any of these entries will be surprising. The game is exceptionally thoughtful with its instances of reused tracks in a way that deeply impressed me. Everything from the reuse of the BBS arrangement of Dearly Beloved for the title menu, to how specifically the KH1 version of the hand-in-hand reprise played as the gummy ship flew off to Olympus, stood out to me as effective and unusually mindful. None of these pieces ever failed to match how each had been used earlier in the series. I had felt myself losing hope in the music implementation team doing the due diligence of using Shimomura's work with as much thought as she had when writing these pieces, so I was happily surprised to find that I had no criticisms whatsoever with the narrative use of any of these tracks for the first time in about a decade since KH2. I'd like to take just a moment to highlight some of my favorite reuses, and I'll make it brief. Night of Tragedy continues to accompany general Heartless Mob encounters, while Hunter of the Dark is used for larger threats like Demon Tower battles. These plays match exactly how both had been used earlier in the secret episode from BBS for the Dark Realm's lesser enemies and the Darkhide mini-boss respectively, so these tracks' employment for 0.2 remains a fantastic continuity. Additionally, Missing You returns to play wonderfully as well, for when Aqua reminisces about spending one more night beneath the stars with her best friends. Based on how BBS and DDD had frequently misused event themes like this, I almost expected some less specific piece, such as Tears of the Light or Treasured Memories, for example. But the decision to use Missing You falls right in line with this track's prior use in the series as a theme of longing, so I'm very happy to have heard it reprise here. What was at least a little bit noteworthy was that Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo wasn't adapted in any way for the field theme of Castletown's Gear Collection tutorial. This track had been used for the Castle of Dreams field theme when the world resided in the Realm of Light back in BBS. Obviously, it would have been an unacceptably inappropriate decision, considering the mood of the game's atmosphere, but it's still interesting to me that a Dark Realm arrangement of the track wasn't developed. Ultimately though, I think the decision to reacquaint players with the field theme that was chosen, Night in the Dark Dream, was more practical in nearly every way, especially when considering how influential this track would be in affecting the arrangements of other field themes later in the game, as we'll talk about soon. Moving on, the KH1 original track, Miracle, is also used very briefly, as Mickey reenacts the door-closing ceremony from the first game. Originally it plays in KH1 when Sora finds Kairi aboard Hook's ship, and when Kairi later restores Sora from being a Heartless, and the most identifying feature of this short track is its Dearly Beloved variation. The choice to use the piece in 0.2 was likely made due to the track being as short as it is, but it may not be a coincidence that the piece can also motivically communicate the idea of light within darkness due to the adaptation of Dearly Beloved within the track. Honestly, no music was even needed for the scene, but the new employment of Miracle is absolutely harmless. In much the same way that the KH2 track, Courage, was given some new life with its plays encoded, I'm glad to hear Shimomura's Miracle given some new life with its repurposing here, too. Now, paralleling the ending of KH1 and the closing of the door to darkness, always on my mind plays as Aqua lies on the Destiny Island's shoreline as the world is restored, and it continues as she falls back into the darkness. What's even further impressive, beyond that the track use here echoes the situation happening from Sora's perspective in KH1, is that the medley fades out just before the quote of Kairi. This is just admirable musical awareness by the music implementation team for 0.2, since the scene is unrelated to Kairi. Next, Destiny's Union deserves some special recognition in how it plays beautifully for Aqua remembering the Wayfinder Trio's bond in just the same way as it had been used earlier when introduced back in Birth by Sleep. As we've talked about before, this is the musical identity of an unbreakable connection, and the message to the player as it accompanies Aqua pulling out her Wayfinder while speaking with Mickey, as well as Aqua finally meeting up with Terra and Ven, is that of determination to someday reunite with her friends. Additionally, Destiny's Force is also used brilliantly for exclusively dark side enemy encounters, except for the one event battle with the Keeper of the Dark Orb Darkside. The track used for this event is the battle loop from Dive into the Heart Dastati, which we are aware is the infrastructure from which nearly every darkness-related melody in the series is based upon. Come to think of it, I was actually a little surprised when I didn't find too many darkness-related motives in the tracks that made up 0.2's OST, but to have this track play here could not be more perfect. Finally, many of the reused tracks in 0.2 accompany single-instance moments that uniquely underscore some scene, and the key is no different. It plays one time in 0.2 when Mickey finds the Dark Realm's Kingdom Key D and recites the cryptic message originally from KH1's World Terminus. In the past, the key had been used in BBS twice for situations involving Ven or the Key X-Blade. For 0.2, the track's use gives the discovery of the Kingdom Key D the same importance as that of the legendary weapon. The usage parallel in the music, linking how the X-Blade is used to summon Kingdom Hearts, while the two Kingdom Keys seal the door to darkness, is not unnoticed. Now, as a thought experiment, if we wanted to consider the track title to have any bearing on whatever situation is happening on screen, maybe it would seem appropriate to consider playing something like The Key of Darkness for the discovery of the Dark Realm's Keyblade. However, this brings up a crucial point that I want to stress. We should not give a track title any significance when considering which piece is used for some event. The Key of Darkness might have a fitting title purely considering the events of the scene in 0.2, but we need to strongly consider that this track has only ever been used in association to characters who use darkness to commit some tragedy. The incongruity would be jarring when compared to how the track had been used in the past. To hammer home the point, we would not expect, for example, Enter the Darkness to play when a character enters a dark portal. Nor The Other Promise to play when some character makes a promise. And I mean, I have more examples of why this would be very stupid.
A heart's more than that!
It's working together!
Lucky for me, you two came along at just the right time. And the rest has been unforgettable. Yep, Unforgettable. Just like your face. All for one, and one for all.
So, the only appropriate way of matching any reused track to a scene is to compare the narrative functions of prior scenes where the track had been previously used, which is what we've been doing in this video series. This is a critical point to consider when thinking about how pieces are used in previous and future games. Now that we've addressed the most noteworthy of 0.2's reused tracks, we can focus more strongly on all the new pieces this game introduced to the franchise. It remains the case that this is the smallest original track list of any game in the series so far, but the ways that all the pieces in 0.2 are incorporated suggest a kind of melodic experimentalism and thematic resourcefulness that can be expected of a modern Kingdom Hearts project, and these smart arrangements set the musical standard for the future very high. Despite the length of the OST, the network diagram of 0.2's shared musical material is surprisingly well connected. Let's now introduce the musicians responsible for the sound direction in 0.2. Series composer Yoko Shimomura has typically had a fairly strong hand in shaping the musical narrative of most every previous game. However, 0.2 will introduce a new helping hand for the series, Yuko Komiyama, who would go on to arrange the new Dark World field themes, as well as Aqua Mirror Illusion for the Phantom Aqua battles. In addition to this, we need to also recognize the other folks who assisted with these tracks. Tomomichi Takeoka orchestrated Komiyama's arrangements, and Sachiko Miyano was the orchestrator for Shimomura's only composition in 0.2, Wave of Darkness 1. Sebastian Schwartz will be the arranger responsible for Wave of Darkness 2, the second phase of the final Demontide battle. With these names in mind, we can now start to talk about how 0.2's original score accompanies Aqua's journey through the Realm of Darkness. We'll begin with the Aqua family. Aqua's group here is made up of Aqua's original BBS arrangement and the new arrangement by Yuko Komiyama for all the Phantom Aqua fights in 0.2. We've talked before about the different elements in Aqua's original theme and how they connected to different pieces throughout the soundtrack of Birth by Sleep, so it must come as no surprise that the track for Phantom Aqua is essentially a new arrangement of most of the elements that make up the older theme. In the same way that the Dream Drop Distance track, L'Impeto Oscuro, is essentially an evolutionary version of BBS's Dark Impetus, Aqua Mirror Illusion serves a similar evolutionary function, as the underscore for the personification of Aqua's doubts and insecurities. Komiyama's unique and prominent arrangement elements for the track include a new chromatic piano bassline, and many sections of choir and string aleatoric textures, like rises and unpitched tremolo. The structure of the Mirror Illusion arrangement is nearly identical to BBS's Aqua, aside from a few new measures here and there for transitional purposes, so there isn't much more that's motivically new happening in the piece. But that said, what makes the track so effective is really the subtlety of the sound design, how Komiyama transformed Aqua's unadorned and relatively facile character identification track with instrumentation and extended orchestration techniques to musically echo the torment Aqua endured with the Phantom's taunts. Shimomura said of her original track that she felt the timbre of an irreplaceable cello gave the piece more of a feeling of determination, and Komiyama opting to keep Shimomura's original instrumentation while adding these unsettling compositional elements to the track shows a respect for Shimomura's intent that I can't help but feel relieved and inspired by. Komiyama's arrangement is such a great musical portrayal of the damage to Aqua's psyche as she battles her inner turmoil. The only compositional proposition I feel I could add would be to consider how neat it might have been to hear each of these creepy new musical elements sneaking in one at a time with every new Phantom Aqua encounter. The purpose would be musically expressing how Aqua's theme becomes further corrupted with each subsequent battle as the cracks in her resolve deepen. But this said, I totally understand how a deadline may have limited what was possible, especially considering how short the OST is already. The track's current use in the game doesn't detract from the experience at all. This is just a fun consideration. Let's move on to the Demon Tide family next. As a reminder, both of these tracks only play once in the game for the final Demon Tide battle. The 1 and 2 indicate which phase of the fight that each track plays, similarly to DDD's Lemonenza Oscura 1 and 2. Recall that Wave of Darkness 1 is Shimomura's only composition for 0.2, and this track was orchestrated for the game by Sachiko Miyano and performed by the Tokyo Philharmonic. Regarding any relationship the piece has to anything else in the series, I did not find any strong musical connections aside from the shared main melody from both phases of the battle. However, I did want to briefly acknowledge that we can find Shimomura's familiar stylistic technique of writing strings with similar tresillo, or 3-3-2 rhythmic accents, in Wave of Darkness 1 and Hunter of the Dark. This, of course, isn't indicative of any sort of relationship between the tracks, so I didn't mark it in the chart, but it was interesting that this stylistic element can be found in these pieces, as well as in DDD's The Dread of Night and others we've previously talked about. Now, Shimomura did mention in an interview that her initial submission of the track to Nomura for approval didn't go so well, Nomura saying to Shimomura that he thought she wasn't living up to her own standards. In the end though, listeners were eventually treated with this catchy melody that plays exclusively for this battle in 0.2, and in that regard one might even consider the track to be a character theme for Demon Tides, considering that it returns for these fights in KH3 as well. Now phase 2 of the final Demon Tide fades in the track Wave of Darkness 2, arranged by Sebastian Schwartz. This will be his only musical contribution to the series until now, but I unfortunately can't say his arrangement of Shimomura's original really left that much of a positive impression. Just the auditory difference between Shimomura's live Tokyo Philharmonic recorded arrangement featuring a fast and clear piano lead compared to Schwartz's lethargic sampled choir is honestly staggering. I'm sure the request must have had an incredibly tight deadline or some other situation came up, because the decision to replace the 190 BPM piano with what is notoriously a slow synthesized instrument that usually serves a supporting role seems especially clumsy. If the intent was to give the melody more gravitas for the final push in the fight, it would seem like some sort of fast attack lead, like a choir of trumpets, an electric guitar, or any pitched percussion, would have been much more effective and not muddied the melody like this sampled choir does. I imagine the choir was chosen to fit more in line with a traditional Final Fantasy finale score, but not everything needs choir to be epic, you know? In my opinion, 0.2 will musically stumble to its finish line because of this bizarre, messy instrumentation. Okay, with both the Aqua and Demon Tide groups addressed, we can now move into the families of tracks that were more influential in shaping the musical impression of the Dark Realm as a location. The most noteworthy of which will be the track that defined the Realm of Darkness all the way back in Birth by Sleep. But before we talk about that special piece, let's first go through the two new worlds swallowed by the darkness, and speak about the connected musical material in The World Within and The Forest of Thorns. The Dwarf Woodlands from Birth by Sleep was scored with Shimomura's The Secret Whispers, and this piece contains many distinct phrases that were ripe for use as thematic referential material. For 0.2, Yuko Komiyama's arrangement for The World Within, which is a darkness-corrupted Dwarf Woodlands, makes use of material from the second half of The Secret Whispers. We can find not only the same oboe melody from the original, but also the accompaniment harp and string pizzicato. Notably, The World Within does not make reference to the melody from the first half of The Secret Whispers, but interestingly, Forest of Thorns does. Komiyama's Forest of Thorns, though, is primarily an adaptation of the Enchanted Dominion field theme, which, as a world, has also fallen to darkness since the events of BBS. Take notice compositionally that Komiyama also makes use of similar unsettling sound design that was incorporated into her Aqua Mirror Illusion arrangement, the string tremolo that ebbs away just as soon as it appears. Musically, Forest of Thorns referencing both the Dwarf Woodlands as well as the Enchanted Dominion would seem to be a little strange, but what's remarkable about this arrangement in the context of the game is that this Dwarf Woodlands intro sequence only plays while Aqua exits the World Within and approaches the forest. When the track is looped, it does not start over from the beginning. It starts midway through, skipping over the Dwarf Woodlands reference from the Forest of Thorns area card reveal and onward during gameplay. This kind of adaptivity in the music is almost unheard of in the Kingdom Hearts series. The only other example that comes to mind is the KH1 Halloween Town track, This Is Halloween Guillotine Gate, fading right into This Is Halloween proper after the party enters the fountain area. For 0.2, Yuko Komiyama's incorporation of The Secret Whispers as transitional material in Forest of Thorns is an early indication of this sort of seamless cutscene to gameplay musical work that we can expect in future games. And it's very impressive to hear this more advanced compositional integration in a Kingdom Hearts game done so well. The final set of observations we can take account of is the influence Night in the Dark Dream had in affecting the arrangements of these two new field themes arranged for 0.2. Again, we'll see how Yuko Komiyama raises the bar of the series' musical narrative with not only how she thoughtfully referenced worlds from BBS, but while also simultaneously incorporating elements from Shimomura's overarching Dark World field theme as well. Regarding Night in the Dark Dream, it's very hard to overstate the importance the track had on the sound direction of 0.2, and how it affected Yuko Komiyama's two arrangements. Let's just take a minute to go through the track and pick out the most important elements that were repurposed throughout the new field themes for the game. First, please take notice of the C minor to B flat minor vamp played by the piano here. This is an element that introduces the accompaniment pattern, which other pieces will then layer with a familiar melody over top. We can find the same vamp clearly present in the piano that begins Forest of Thorns. As well as an incorporation in The World Within. In both cases, they are clear callbacks, but notice how they're not done in a segmented way like we might hear in an Ishimoto track, for example. The vamp is just used as an element on which any number of other melodies can be added to in a way that doesn't draw attention to itself as a primary musical statement. Compare this to something like Keyblade Cycle, for example, which really hammers the theme into the listener with numerous repetitions in a way that feels a little like the composer is treating the audience like a child and not trusting them to pick up on the melody. If it's not abundantly clear already, I really appreciate how composers show restraint in their scores by giving their music space to grow and change. The next musical moment in Night in the Dark Dream, and probably the one most people take notice of, is the melody played here by solo cello. Now, this instrumentation probably wasn't chosen with the foresight that Aqua would eventually roam the realm of darkness, but for 0.2 and the BBS Secret episode, the use of cello here as the primary melody can also instrumentally connect the track to Aqua, whose theme also features the instrument in what Shimomura called an irreplaceable decision. So I have to believe that there's some intent with these instrumental decisions. Additionally, if you'll recall from the Dream Drop music analysis, the only other character theme with such a prominent and pivotal instrumental designation to feature solo cello is Riku. So, in my mind, the cello has become an instrument associated with either Keyblade mastery or struggling with darkness in some sense. And although this can't be applied to a ton of tracks in Shimomura's oeuvre, it does make me begin to wonder what other instrumental designations Shimomura has concocted to link other characters to relevant thematic material. Now, returning to the cello lead in Night in the Dark Dream, we can hear this melody appear again in Forest of Thorns, as well as a transposition of it an octave up on solo violin in The World Within. Notice how the melody flows right into the field themes of the original worlds without needing any additional transitional sections, since the undercurrent vamp behaves like a sort of ostinato that connects all the musical elements that make up the piece. From these incorporations in Yuko Komiyama's field arrangements, we can see how the influence of Night in the Dark Dream has affected these once happy, carefree tunes, turning them into oppressive and heavy tracks. Just like Aqua's memories are no longer safe from the darkness, so too are the musical expressions of these now barren, lost locations. Clearly, there is much to appreciate in the complete soundtrack of 0.2 Birth by Sleep, and by exploring each of these pieces and the ways that instrumentation and referential material is used, we can come to a more valuable recognition of the impact 0.2's music had on the following games in the series. It's difficult to find many faults or missteps with the musical decisions this entry made, and the resulting strength of the soundscape sets a bar to which every future entry should strive to achieve. Komiyama's creative efforts on the score perfectly encapsulates the adaptive potential of Shimomura's series-wide musical groundwork, and it serves a breath of fresh air that the series has really needed for a long time. The next video we'll talk about will be the music of the Key Saga, Union Cross, Back Cover, and Dark Road. Like Coded, this will encapsulate a series of games that were developed for the mobile phone and were similarly released under strained circumstances. This is a story defined by a turbulent history of rebrandings, re-releases, and, for us, a whirlwind of returning music that has had just as tumultuous and interesting a history as the games do.